Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Stephanie Kodish. I'm the Global Director for Drive to Zero of CALSTART, and I'm really pleased to welcome you all here today. We are a program of CALSTART, and we are also a campaign of the Clean Energy Ministerial. Today's press conference is entitled Tipping Point, Update on Transition to Zero Emission Vehicles. It's so titled because we are teetering on the edge, literally. Technology and wisdom are on our side, but time and adequate action are not. To offer a bit of context, an accelerated uptake on zero-emission trucks, buses, vans, and cars is necessary in order to deliver the economic, the health benefits, the high-quality jobs, strengthened energy security, and to meet the Paris Agreement. Road transport represents more than 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and its emissions are rising faster than almost any other sector. In order to meet climate goals, major markets need to achieve 100% zero-emission sales for cars and vans by 2035 and for buses and trucks by 2040. And all other countries need to follow suit, collectively reaching 100% zero-emitting vehicles by 2045. This transition would implicate avoidance of 95 gigatons of CO2 emissions between 2023 and 2050. That amount is equivalent to 3 times the total global emissions from fuel combustion in 2020 alone. Achieving these goals is precisely what 2 key instruments are designed to do: the Global MOU and the ZEV Declaration, part of the reason that we are here gathered today. 36 countries have already signed and made commitments to fully transition to carbon-free, zero-emission trucks and buses by 2040. That is the Global Memorandum of Understanding to zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles. 42 countries have adopted policies or made voluntary commitments to phase out internal combustion engines in cars and vans through the Zero Emission Vehicles Declaration. Global ambition is rising. The technology is here. There are over 850 different models of zero-emitting buses and trucks alone. Countries are entrenching this ambition in regulation, as with the example of the EU CO2 regs for heavy duty, as well as the regulations from the US most recently. And the total cost of ownership has already reached parity in many markets, and the business case only continues to improve. Yet, there are still many countries that have not yet set specific targets and matching policies to achieve zero-emission vehicles. These clear demand signals are necessary to provide market certainty, as is preventing a 2-track transition between developed and developing countries. This transition needs to be focused on equity. We are making great progress. First-mover countries and companies are demonstrating that the transition is possible, that the business case is here, and even without the perfect conditions in place, things are still progressing. I want to give a couple of highlights focused on emerging markets. These emerging markets that I'll focus on are engaged with ZEV Declaration and the Global MOU. And one example is Turkey. Their EV sales rose from 1% to 6% within 1 year. That was spearheaded by their domestic auto company TOG and driven by government incentives, becoming a global EV frontrunner. India's shift toward EVs, as we'll hear a bit more about in a moment, has gained substantial momentum, with registrations growing 70% year over year. This surge is nearly 10 times higher than India's light-duty vehicle market growth for the same period. This showcases the effectiveness of government incentives. On the heavy-duty side, large-scale deployments are being delivered across emerging markets. For example, 120 tractor-trailers in Mexico, 1,000 refuse trucks in Ghana, and close to 6,000 electric buses in India. At COP28, there was a great announcement for a new effort called the ZEV Rapid Response Facility. This facility was announced for the specific purpose of supporting emerging markets with additional technical help rapidly in order to find pathways direct to scale. At the macro level, EVs have reached a tipping point globally in 2023, with 31 countries surpassing 5% battery electric vehicle sales. That share is up. In addition, that is up from 19 countries in 2022. This threshold is critical for mass adoption, indicating a rapid uptake in the near term. From the light-duty perspective in 2023, EVs outperformed the auto market recovery, growing from 35% in 2022. By comparison, global light-duty sales grew 10.5% over 2022. 1 in 5 light-duty vehicles were sold globally, they were electric, with Norway, Iceland, and Sweden as the top 3 markets among ZEV Declaration signatories. From the HDV side, almost 50,000 electric buses were sold in 2023. That's an equivalent of 3% of the total bus sales, bringing the total stock to approximately, well, over 600,000. 1/5 of these bus sales that were electric were in Global MOU countries, Canada, Chile, Finland, the Netherlands, and Portugal. China, the leading market for electric trucks, accounted for 70% of global sales in 23, and Europe and the US truck sales increased almost threefold in 2023. Most critical to this transition is regulation, as is a focus on charging infrastructure, a key priority that is shared amongst ZEV Declaration and Global MOU signatories. Governments have the tools needed today in order to accelerate zero-emission vehicle infrastructure, and that's through collaborative planning, strategic and market-driven agreements and policies. What is needed is swift, robust action to meet collective goals and achieve our global ambitions. Today, I have the pleasure of announcing that ZEVwise, a collaborative of leading global governments, development finance institutions, and nonprofit organizations, is launching the Global Green Corridor Initiative to revolutionize freight corridors across the world, advancing an initial 10 by 2026. Road corridors represent vital routes linking industry hubs, ports, and cities. But more than that, they represent the whole of the ecosystem and all stakeholders working together to create a bright and decarbonized future. These corridors are on autonomous projects, and they are focused on publicly available infrastructure and networked together for the purpose of accelerating and securing each corridor's success, while establishing a pathway of best practices for the many more corridors that are needed in each region. The Global Green Corridor Initiative will demonstrate holistic models for successful infrastructure deployment and finance, while also serving as a blueprint, a beacon, and a catalyst for replication and scale. You can find more information about the initial 8 corridors, as well as the rapid finance facility in your resource list that's placed on each of the chairs that you sit on. And these corridors will stretch across the globe. They will touch Africa, India, Asia, Europe, and North America to begin, and we will be announcing additional corridors in the coming months. I am so delighted to introduce Michael Barabee from the US Department of Energy to talk more about this exciting initiative and one of the specific 8 corridors. It's a special treat for you all to consider, especially if you are soccer fans or football.
Depending where you are. Hello, everyone. Michael Barabee. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Sustainable Transportation and Fuels from the U.S. Department of Energy. I want to say I want to talk about the corridor specifically. I just want to take a step back. We've been very proud to be part of and support the Global Zero Emission Freight MOU, led by many countries, the Netherlands, by CALSTART's team as well. Early on, setting that ambition and recognizing that we can get there. We can actually get to zero emission freight was really important. But we are now several years in at a point where we need to move from ambition to much more detailed action. Time is not on our side in making this transition. And while the economics are there to move to zero-emission vehicles, the cost savings on an operating basis, especially for commercial fleets, as Stephanie said, is a really strong pull. But there are still many headwinds, many challenges in any transition of this size. There are many government incentives available in different places as well to help that. But we need to do everything we can to collaborate globally, to bring together the best practices across many different countries. No one country has all the best ideas, but by putting our heads together, we can achieve much more. To that end, we announced several weeks ago in the United States a zero emission freight corridor strategy, laying out specific corridors and maps and a plan of how do we build out zero emission freight with hubs and ports starting, moving to longer corridors, and literally laying out on a map over time what we see that strategy being. We will not ultimately, as a federal government, be building all that charging and building all those corridors. But what we can do is help to bring together private sector, help to bring together fleets, first movers, to help lay out a strategy and plan. So working with the ZEV Coalition, which we've been really happy to support, also a very good public-private partnership example, has aligned very well with that. So the new 10 global corridors, one of those, for those of you may know, FIFA World Cup coming to North America, across Canada, United States, Mexico. So one of those corridors really aligning across that and aligning as well within the U.S. strategy up through that corridor along the west coast of the U.S. I think it's a great example of bringing together the global partnership, building upon individual country actions, and in this case, really leveraging a great global opportunity. For those of you that are not from the U.S., people in the U.S. actually do watch football, soccer, as we say, more than you might imagine. So we'll get lots of attention there. With that, I think I'll pause there, and we'll have some time for questions after. I'll hand it over to my colleagues.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me at this event. Let me just start by saying I think Stephanie started with the electric bus example in India, because there's some new faces in the room. I'll draw some correlations, some parallels to electric trucking. I designed and managed and then led the electric bus program in India. We went from 500 buses on the road to 27,000. I live in Delhi. We're at 35% electric, and next year we should be at about 80, and then onwards to 100. Bangalore, the other city that I'm familiar with, is at 25%. Bombay is probably at about 40%. And this is a large country. We went from 500 to 27,000 contracted buses. That's about $4 billion US. There are some parallels, and conversations around electric charging stations and charging infrastructure are common when we now look at freight and trying to do the same sort of work to get electric freight deployed on roads at scale and with speed. I'm involved in building a new platform that is very similar in work that we did while at the government, this time looking at electric freight as well. Our job is to go out and build bankable opportunities. Investors in my career that I've dealt with keep saying, we have the money, but stuff is not bankable. And governments, of course, are there to provide the enabling environment and the structure around it. But the market is what it is. We can't change the whole market overnight, but we don't have climate change on our side in terms of speed. So we've just got to get to scale and speed properly. So right now we're involved in building out a platform for electric trucks at scale by aggregating demand. There are a few things I've learned over the years in trying to attempt scale. To scale something, we are looking to convert this into a service. Technology around batteries is not settled yet, and to leave that risk must remain with those that know how to operate it best. When you make something into a service, you incentivize somebody else to give you efficiency and give you quality. And do only what you can do, which means that charging infrastructure should really be in the hands of charge point operators, whose job is to provide the best charging at the cheapest rate at the highest level of efficiency. So the sooner we can get to a model at scale is the work that we're doing in this platform. We'll go out, and once the solution is bankable only, will we be able to deploy capital. We're looking to deploy infrastructure capital, because mobility or public mobility is really an infrastructure, except that the asset class has not been categorized as infrastructure. So there's still a lot of work to be done, except we don't have the time to do it in succession. We've got to do it in parallel to get to a certain speed at a certain period of time. Today, back to buses, The other correlation, which I think we will need the help of the community, and this is where I think a lot of European examples can come in and European experience, is that we're working on freight, we're working on corridors. Most likely the charging infrastructure will probably, or should be, similar, and if not common, because that would then just give the highest profit margins to sit in the places, in the right places, so that I, as a principal, get the highest efficiency and the public gets the best rate. The driver for this business, certainly in India, is a rising diesel cost. And of course, it's climate change, and of course, it's air pollution. I live in Delhi. You will pick up the news at the end of the year, and you'll see what happens in Delhi and the air quality. So these are our macro drivers, and that's what we've just begun to do, and really looking forward to learning as much as we can, as quickly as we can from Europe, although the drivers are different, but we have the opportunity to achieve scale at this one time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mao. That was Mao Acharya. She is the CEO of International Energy Transition Platform. And next, I'm pleased to introduce Isabel Gomez Bernal, Senior Transport and Energy Analyst Innovation with Iberdrola.
Thank you very much. Well, from the point of view of industry, we think that regulatory mandates, fiscal incentives, and infrastructure investments are strategies that nations can use to accelerate the transition to zero-emission vehicles by 2035. An increasing number of governments are announcing timelines to transition to new vehicle sales to zero-emission vehicles, both in the form of high-level targets, as the United Kingdom zero-emission vehicle mandate, as well as binding regulations, like the United States new emission standards for light-duty vehicles that will spur more zero-emission vehicles sales. Together, both of them, targets and binding regulation, can send a clear signal for all stakeholders, particularly manufacturers, fleet operators, grid operators, charging infrastructure providers like Iberdrola, to coordinate and plan their investment, thus enabling an efficient and smooth transition. Iberdrola has been developing renewable energy for the last 20 years, and now is committed to fight against climate change, helping to decarbonize the economy. In this sense, we believe that zero-emission vehicles are the solution to transport decarbonizations, and joining initiatives like the Zero Emission Vehicle Declaration and Global Memorandum of Understanding is key to help both governments and businesses to reach its transport decarbonization strategies. Also, Iberdrola, as global energy leader, are setting up the Mediterranean Corridor, a 450 kilometers emission-free route in Spain. With this initiative, we want to accelerate the electrification of trucks in order to reduce CO2 emissions and combat climate change. But also, it is the first alliance that brings together all sectors involved in the electrification of heavy-duty transport. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isabel, and thank you, panelists. We're going to be available to answer questions in a little bit, but first, it's my pleasure to introduce from the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management with the Government of the Netherlands, Dennis Zeitze.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to, on behalf of Minister of Infrastructure and Water Management of the Netherlands, Mark Harbers, to express his regrets for not making it with us today. He had his flight cancelled, and he didn't make it in time today, so apologies for that. Now you have me. My name is Dennis Zeitze. I work as a policy officer, sustainable logistics at the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management of the Netherlands. And yeah, I'll say a few words and do some announcements for you today. So first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the ITF organization for pulling off this great event. And also, of course, to our very dear co-lead CALSTART, with whom we are co-leading Global MOU. And of course, to the ZEV Declaration team, and specifically to the United Kingdom government and the Accelerating to Zero Coalition for organizing this press conference together with us. And also a big thanks to our great speakers that we have with us today that have expressed some very interesting insights, updates, and announcements from cars and vans to trucks and buses, And it was great to hear about the finances around, the mechanics around financing the transition and the corridor developments that are happening all over the world. As you may know, we, the Netherlands, are co-leading Global Memorandum of Understanding on zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles, in simpler terms, trucks and buses, together with CALSTART, that we have launched at COP26 in Glasgow 3.5 years ago. And since then, we've been co-leading this initiative, where we aim at 100% zero-emission new sales by 2040, with an interim target of 30% by 2030. These aims are non-binding and are meant to align and move stakeholders to achieve this transition. This brings me to my first announcement. I am proud and humbled and very excited to officially announce 3 new Global MOU signatory countries, Costa Rica, the Seychelles, and Tonga. And I'm also very honored to have a representative from Tonga present here with us today that has made it all the way from there. Great to see our community attracting more and more emerging countries and small island states that recognize the need for bold ambitions, joining our movement and take concrete steps towards decarbonizing transport. Next to new signatory countries, we have 30 new endorsers that have joined our Global MOU community. And Global MOU endorsers vary from utility providers to fleet owners to original equipment manufacturers to financial institutions, et cetera, so from the whole ecosystem. And it's great to work together with both signatory countries and the endorsers towards our common goal. Of course, the press conference is not only on the Global MOU, but also on the ZEV Declaration. That focuses on cars and vans. And that brings me to my second announcement that I would like to make on behalf of our colleagues from the UK government and our friends from the ZEV Declaration team, where signatories commit to work together towards all sales of cars and vans being zero emission globally by 2040. So thereby I would like to warmly welcome Colombia and Nigeria as new signatories to the ZEV Declaration. This signal of ambition from Africa's most populous nation demonstrates a clear step in their electric vehicle transition. Their energy transition plan supports a net zero goal of 2060 and establishes ambitious targets for electric vehicle adoption. After my little speech, we will hear from the Colombian Minister of Transport himself on the Colombian ambitions and their reasoning behind both our initiatives. This all leads us to the ZEV Declaration being signed by over 230 countries, businesses, and organizations. This brings me to the end of my speech, I now would like to warmly welcome and invite Colombian Minister of Transport, Mr. Camargo Triana, to the stage to say a few words on why Colombia has signed both initiatives and why he believes this is important.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, so ready? Good afternoon to everyone. For us, it's very important have the opportunity to sign this Memorandum of Understanding. The decarbonization of the sector is a matter of importance to achieve the country's energy transition. In recent years, sustainable transportation has been globally relevant due to the need of an interesting contribution to the reduction of greenhouse gas emission. Colombia's road transport vehicle fleet consists of over 18.3 million of vehicles, where 61% are motorcycles, 35% are light vehicles, and 4% are heavy vehicles. This latter category is the oldest in terms of operational age. They are more or less surpassing 30 years in age. On average, the national fleet in Colombia is 19 years old, and they are all moved with diesel and gasoline. So we need to update this fleet to meet current environmental and energy consumption requirements. On the other hand, all our fleet is predominantly fossil fuels, 45% gasoline, 40% diesel, 10% jet fuel, and 3% natural gas. And we are the sector with the highest consumption in terms of demand, representing 42% of energy in comparison of global average of 26% in the world. In this moment, we are moving to reduction in NDC projects. We are a target to incorporation of 600,000 electric vehicles by 2030. We are also in a program of modernization of cargo vehicles over 20 years old. We are promoting freight transportation in rails. We are trying to promote more or less 1,800 kilometers of rails in operation. Within the last 30 years, we lost the opportunity to move in cargo in rails. We also promoting the use of river like Magdalena in terms of transport option. And I promoted NAMAs about transit-oriented development, trying to promote the combination between urban planning and transport planning to increase the use of best consumption on land uses in Colombia. The importance, obviously, of this option of signing the memorandum is promote emerging markets, establish lines of value and development of new models of business in Colombia. For us, the promotion of this memorandum has an opportunity to change the modal option that we have in terms of use of diesel, of gasoline. So we need to improve new ways to increase the fleet of the vehicle electrics, and we are creating some programs. For example, we are promoting the increase of electric buses in BRT. We expect in the next 10 years increase to 4,170 new vehicles in buses in BRT, 214,000 taxis that in this moment are using gasoline, promote to electric vehicles, for example, and light-duty vehicles is to renew more than 3,194 light trucks and vans in electric vehicles by 2030. We are creating a funding to support this proposal, and this funding must be initiate its operation in the fourth quarter of the current year. So we expect to sign this memorandum can contribute to achieve these goals in the next 5 years of our period of government. Decarbonizing is also a global target, and as part of the Colombia government, we are interested in be part of that adoption in the next year, and support this chain will also increase the opportunity not only in chain of terms of our fleets of vehicles, but also in industrialization in Colombia, that we provide this new memorandum as an opportunity. Right? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Minister Camargo Tiara. We are just delighted to welcome Colombia and the Tonga, as well as the other nations, to both the Global MOU. You please, if you'd like to join us, if you're able. Yes, that would be wonderful. No, of course. Great, and thank you, Dennis. So we do have a little bit of time if there are any questions. Please.
Without maybe speaking directly to the tariffs, since not directly my area of responsibility in the government, I would say that we have, through the incentives that have been put in place over the last few years, there is now close to $130 billion of investment in battery and EV production that's been announced and is actually starting to be built in the U.S. When that capacity comes all online over the next 2 years, that will have enough capacity to support approximately 80% of all vehicles in the U.S. being electric. So there's basically a tremendous amount of capacity actually coming in the U.S. in terms of battery production and EV production. And there's also close to $6 billion of public money that's been matched 2 to 1 by the private sector to build out the battery supply chain for all the components that go into the batteries. So for example, people talk about graphite. We'll have enough capacity in the U.S. to meet 47% of our graphite demands by 2030. So there are tremendous broadening of the global markets and availability of critical minerals, also a tremendous amount of increased capacity just within the U.S. and also in North America. So we're confident that we'll have the capacity to meet the market demands, to meet the targets of the future regulations, and really the commitments that have been made by the private sector to target EVs.
Please.
Hi, I'm a journalist from South Africa, and I wanted to ask Michael about specifically this new green corridor, because I understand that the port of Durban in South Africa, as well as other sub-Saharan African countries, are included as part of the corridor. Could you perhaps speak to maybe the objectives of the corridor, and have you engaged with governments within the sub-Saharan African region about the objectives of the corridor, what opportunities it could bring, etc.?
I'm glad to answer that. I think broadly speaking, each of the corridors are autonomously managed. So there are different groups, both public and private, that are involved in each of the identified corridors to date. But I want to lift out a little bit to really talk about what the ultimate ambition is, which is the recognition that there is a deep need for green freight corridors to emerge globally and rapidly, and that there are different local needs, and we have an opportunity to learn collaboratively from each other. So by identifying both the processes as well as the tools, as well as areas of vulnerability, so pain points, where are there additional stakeholders that are needed to support the full adoption and full deployment that's necessary for those identified corridors. So the intention is that these 10 corridors are the initial 10 that are identified, and to your question, yes, working at both the local, the federal, the regional level, as well as across the different stakeholder groups, but it's meant to be a big tent approach, so that also welcome in, beyond the initial 10 corridors, are the next waves of these corridors and stakeholders, so that we can have rapid scaling as a result. Please.
Can I just ask one more question? Because in line with that, in South Africa in particular, electric vehicles are already expensive for the ordinary person due to tariffs being about 25% for electric vehicles, and then internal combustion engines are say 17%. So it's way cheaper for an ordinary citizen to get a diesel or petrol engine compared to an EV. So I just wanted maybe anyone on the panel, your opinion about that in particular, because I understand that improving access to EVs is not a top-down approach, it's also a bottom-up approach, that everyone has access to it as well.
That's a great question, Mal. I'm wondering if you want to jump in there.
Sure, thank you. That's a phenomenon in a lot of countries, and in developing countries such as ours, the population is a lot more sensitive. To answer that question, depends on which kind of vehicle. Is it a four-wheeler, is it a truck, or is it a bus, or even something smaller? The Indian government decided that initially there would be a subsidy that would be given to all not trucks because we've not developed that sector enough for electric, but all the way to buses. That suddenly made two-wheelers cheaper, with the subsidy cheaper. When that happened, a lot more two-wheelers came into the market, competition increased, and now a two-wheeler in India, an electric two-wheeler, is around the same price or cheaper than the fossil fuel equivalent. That, however, is not the case with cars, because passenger cars like yours and mine hardly get driven. Less than 10% is the utilization. So some of the answers there are to lease the battery. That would suddenly remove, it'll be cheaper for you and me to go and buy a car. With buses, the answer is very different. An electric bus is about 3 times the cost of a diesel bus, and I know in South Africa it's around the same. The way to respond to that is to convert, instead of buying a bus, you buy a service. When you convert that whole business into buying a service, suddenly electric becomes cheaper, significantly cheaper, because now you're just playing around with the economics a little bit. And the utilization rate is such that the case for electric buses suddenly becomes doable. So I think the mindset change that we all have to make as a community for electric is that the day you start comparing your diesel versus electric, that's a non-starter. We've got to find another way of delivering that service to people like you and me, and the state and the government and private operators and fleet and so on.
I'll maybe add one other perspective. In the United States, I believe this is probably pretty true in many countries. Any new vehicle is a relatively high-end good. In the United States, there are 2.5 times used vehicles sold for every new vehicle. And certainly when you look across the economic spectrum, those are by far the more affordable vehicles and bought by people who have lower incomes. One of the things that we did in the U.S. is when we revised all the recent tax credits, for the first time we put a purchase tax credit for used EVs, so that not just a new EV gets a tax credit, but there's also now $4,000 US available for the purchase of a used EV. And that's, again, to try to help expand that market access to a broader group of people.
Thank you both. Any other questions? Please, Sita.
I was just wondering, the exercise that we just did with the cost, how does that translate to trucks, and what is needed specifically for the truck sector?
I'm going to have to limit, of course, my answer to India, because the drivers in Europe are very different from the drivers in India. By driver, I mean business driver. Business drivers are in India right now are to do with the cost of diesel, and diesel prices are only going up, they're not going down. And nobody wants price exposure beyond a certain point, and price exposure, when you draw a trend line 3 years backwards, 5 years backwards, becomes unaffordable. So the biggest driver for electric trucks in India will be diesel prices. However, the business economics for electric trucks right now has not yet been proven. And it's hard for me to answer the cost differential for electric trucks, except operating them is going to be cheaper. Now, who will transfer over to operating electric trucks? Most likely the drivers will be those companies that are moving goods and that have greenhouse gas targets on themselves. If they have decided to go net zero or reduce their emissions in some way and have made those commitments to their shareholders, they're bound to those commitments. And there are only so many things you can do to reduce your emissions. Beyond the point, you are going to have to buy other offsets or change the way you do business. For companies that move goods around from place to place, this is heavy goods, there are very few options with regard to transport. So between the trucking companies and the shippers, meaning the companies that are moving goods around, we will have to find a solution where the cost driver for diesel will have to be brought down. And I think the answer for that will be through scale.
So you talked about this tipping point once this like a certain share of electric vehicles is in the market and so
So I think it's a confluence of things. And so I would point to the need for sort of an all sector approach so that it is a public-private focus that incorporates financial incentives to help support more rapid uptake. There are examples, including from India, with respect to demand aggregation to help to continue to bring down those costs. And so that tipping point, while it exists for a set of countries, and it's often regarded as that 5% is that approach, it is a concern that there is that stagnation. But there are a number of policy levers, regulatory levers, financial mechanisms, as well as the security that's enabled through charging infrastructure to help accelerate the uptake.
I'll speak, looking at the light duty market, because it's probably not quite enough sales on the heavy duty to really kind of draw the trend line yet. Through the end of last year, there were so many headlines that talked about stagnating sales, but yet actually last year in the United States, electric vehicle sales were up 53% year over year. They actually were up higher than the year before, so they were accelerating, achieving close to now 10% market share. That said, you will have undoubtedly, as we move from that to getting to 50+% by 2030, it's not going to be a straight line. There'll be some ups and downs in that. And a lot of that does go back to a combination of, you have first set of buyers, second, third set of buyers. Model availability is a critical aspect, actually. So, and model availability comes in lumps. You have manufacturers who had first models available, and then as they saw the market, regulations, policies supporting EVs, started developing new models. They take a while to come out. In the U.S., there's 50 new EV models between now and the end of 2025 that will come out in a much broader price range. So the question that was asked earlier as well, moving beyond your typical first kind of higher priced vehicles, maybe you can afford that, to now the more mass market. And that will help drive demand. Also, infrastructure, as you now get a broader group of people, you need a broader set of infrastructure. There's a tremendous amount of infrastructure built out happening in the U.S. and other countries around the world as well. It takes people who are thinking about buying a new vehicle to have seen a sign on the road when they drove on their last vacation to see, they saw 3 EV charging signs, and they think, next time I buy a car, maybe it can work. So we are confident that it's not a there is not a fundamental slowdown that's kind of this barrier that there's not, that it doesn't make sense. There's only 10% of people that EVs will work for. We think it will work for the total market, the mass market, and you have these factors that take some time to work their way through.
Can I just add to that slowdown question? Again, I'm going to limit to India, but the market is big enough. Two-wheeler sales in India, electric two-wheeler sales, the number of sales for electric crossed their fossil fuel equivalent last year. And it will probably be the same this year as well. For three-wheelers, which is a very large chunk of the small, light commercial vehicle freight, the growth rate is upwards of 70%. It has not yet replaced anything because that category of freight did not exist. The most three-wheelers that you see on Indian roads, for those of you who have been, is passenger transport, the equivalent of a cab. But in the delivery of things for Amazon and food and that kind of delivery, a very large market has come up, and that's the 70% plus sale. To the point about cost from the journalists from South Africa, we're seeing now about 20 or 30 new models of cars coming up. OEMs are not making cars, not having assessed the market. So it remains to be seen what that is, but the car market will perhaps we will never have enough, or we don't have enough variance for consumers to go into a dealership and make a choice that is like to like. And with electric buses, last year, India put, as of now, India's put 8,500 new buses on the roads. Compare that with diesel buses, which is now in the three digits.
Great. Well, if there are no further questions, I hope you will join me in thanking Minister Camargo Triara and our wonderful speakers for today. Thank you. And I would like to offer just two quick reminders or announcements. One is that any of the resources that we've referenced today, you can access through the QR code that's on the half sheets of paper around the room on your seats. And the second is that we hope that you will join us tomorrow at 9 o'clock to talk about heavy-duty finance. There's a session happening in room MPA4 called Pathways for Global Zero Emission Trucks, Getting It Done. So we hope we'll see you there and enjoy lunch. Thank you all.
Thank you.